Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 24 of the Solving Problems podcast, where we help you use story to reach more people and grow your church. If we haven't met, my name is Jonathan Crone, and I'm the host for the show. This is normally where I introduce Kyler Nixon, our co-host, but Kyler's actually joining us for the interview today, so it is just me in the intro. Today, we wanted to cap off season 3 with just a conversation between Kyler and I about some of the churches that we've partnered with and some of the successes they've had, because this season, we've talked a lot about specific uses, websites or giving or preaching, whatever, but StoryBrand can really be implemented in a ton of different ways. So we're going to talk about just some of the ways that we've implemented it through websites, through messaging, through videos, or what that's looked like in our role as StoryBrand certified guides working with other churches. So hopefully you have listened to the other 7 episodes of season 3 by now, but if you haven't, all of season 3 is up on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. All of those episodes are available right now. You can go listen to those when you get done with this episode. But I don't want to take too much time today on the intro, but we're going to go ahead and hit our weekly disclaimer that Kyler and I do not work for StoryBrand. We're not endorsed by StoryBrand. We are actually StoryBrand certified guides. And what that means is we went through extensive training with the StoryBrand team on how to implement StoryBrand with organizations just like you. So that's what we do. If you know about StoryBrand, and if you don't know about StoryBrand, go ahead and pick up the book, Building a StoryBrand by Donald Miller, or listen to his podcast, or one of 1,000 different ways you can learn more about StoryBrand. But if you do know about StoryBrand, one of the things that we have learned is that implementing StoryBrand on your own can be difficult. So that's what the guide program is all about. So we can have outside eyes come in and help you out to implement that. But I don't want to spend too much time here, like I said. So we're going to go ahead and bring the dance music back, and then Kyler's going to be on the other side. And we're going to talk just about some of the successes we've had in the past year and a half of implementing StoryBrand to other churches. And we're here with Kyler. Kyler, go ahead and say hey to everybody.
Hey, guys.
It's always fun when me and you get to do one of these episodes. We do probably 1 or 2 a season, but this is our only one this season that it's just you and me. But the big thing, I mentioned this in the intro, that we're just talking today. Today's just a conversation about some of the successes you and I have had in helping some other churches. So when I ask you, what's the biggest aha moment or some of the best examples you've had, what's the one that comes to your mind first?
Yeah, well, top of mind for me is one of my most recent church clients that I've had the opportunity to work with. I worked with Gateway Church in Houston. So you're probably familiar with Robert Morris Gateway Church in Southlake, Dallas area. His daughter and son-in-law just planted Gateway Houston. They're getting ready to launch in 2020. And so we were able to go through the StoryBrand process with them, their messaging, and then tie that into a couple brand collateral pieces, their prospectus, and then their website launch as they gear up for startup parties. And I think the biggest thing that they took away and that we, kind of came out with was just this really clear process for creating messaging. Like for them, their messaging was geared around getting people to come to their startup parties, but we spent an hour and a half going through the StoryBrand framework. And on the other side of it, they were like, wow, we totally understand, what we're saying. Like we have consistent messaging that we can use. And then on the end of that, they were able to go back to their video team in Dallas, and they shot a 45-second promo for Gateway Houston that played during service, and it was brand scripted. It just used the language from their brand script. So instead of having to spend all this time, recreating content and writing video scripts and writing website copy and all this other kind of stuff, they spent essentially 90 minutes getting really clear about who they were, what they're trying to say, and then they were able to repurpose that in a lot of different mediums.
And you get to say that you had the lead pastor of Gateway in a video that you wrote.
Yeah, he got off script pretty quick, but yeah, the first part of that, it was kind of cool hearing Pastor Robert read some stuff that I'd written.
I think when I think of coolest aha moment I've had, it would be with a church in Southern California. I'll leave the name out just to protect them a little bit because the story could be a little sensitive. When I first talked to their executive pastor, she was telling me about the church, and she was tiptoeing this line because she was talking about how hard it is for them to stay. I mean, they want to stay theologically sound, but they're also in Southern California where they're dealing with a lot of cultural issues. And she was tiptoeing it, and she couldn't get around what she was trying to say. And I knew I could help them with the messaging, but she didn't come right out and say what the issue that they had was. So we ended up signing the contract, and we're doing our strategy sessions to start our messaging out, and their lead pastors with it then. And he filled me in on the rest of the story. And the story is that there is a prominent person in the LGBTQ community who is an active attender of their church. And so that's what they were having issues with. They want to make sure that people knew that they were inclusive, that you didn't have to have your life together, or that you could disagree, or you could be exploring faith. They wanted all of those things to be said or communicated, but they also wanted to stay true to their beliefs and what they believe. So as we were working through the process and developing their brand script, there's just a point after we developed the brand script, even the rough draft, that their lead pastor and their executive pastor they both had this moment of like, that's what we've been trying to say. And they felt like they finally had the words to express what type of church they wanted to be, and that they were open to people who had doubts, who were skeptics, who may have been hurt to the church or hurt by the church. And so putting that together and being able to give them the resources to speak to their community, that was just a really fun moment for me.
Yeah, I remember you going through that, and from like a granular level too. I don't know if you were planning on unpacking this, but one of the coolest things, seeing you kind of work through that, and then where it ended, was that you really hit that empathy piece really, really well for them. And I think that was kind of the key. Like, a lot of church brand scripts can tend to look similar because there's only a handful of, I mean, in our experience, there's only really a handful of problems that churches tend to position themselves to solve. But for them to kind of be a little bit farther out, and for you to really push that empathy piece and put that on all of their marketing stuff and whatever, was just really cool how you were able to work through that. So that was, from my side, from a spectator side, that was kind of cool to see where that one ended for sure.
And just I'll give a little more specifics on that. So I'm looking at their website now. Their headline for their website says a safe place to explore faith. At our church, we welcome doubts, encourage questions, and accept everyone. So right away, we're telling people that, like, you don't have to have your stuff together. We encourage your questions. We welcome your doubts, and you're going to be accepted no matter what. Mm-hmm. And I just remember like hearing the story from their lead pastor that this person, she comes to church, and she's not a Christian, but every couple weeks she's there on the front row, standing and she'll sing sometimes, but she's never given, she's never served. They don't think she's a believer, but at the same time, she knows she's welcomed in that church and she's hearing the gospel, which I think is something that all of us in any church, no matter your beliefs, our goal is to get people there so they can hear the gospel, and then we let the Spirit do the rest. But that's one of the things that one stuck with me a lot. Being able to do that for them. And we launched that site probably, it was the week before Easter. So it was Palm Sunday. So here in a couple months, I'll follow back with them, 6 month review, and just see the success they're having. So we don't have that data yet. But I know that they've had this success in being able to communicate to their community.
Yeah, totally. We had a church in Phoenix that was positioned kind of similarly, not as much focus on, this sounds bad when I say it, but not as much focus on like the inclusion side of it. They are inclusive, but they're focused a little bit more on kind of like church for those who have been hurt by church, sort of. And that was really cool to kind of go through that with them. They're a church plant, and the two pastors that were kind of leading the charge had worked at mega churches. I mean, I'm talking huge churches, and they were both very systematic thinkers, like very like executive pastor type people. And so for them, it was kind of hard because they, I don't know if you are an executive pastor listening to this, you might resonate with this, or if you're working with executive pastors who think like this, they think in very like, kind of linear term. So like, for instance, we were going through some of their messaging stuff and they wanted to put everything in like cadences. So I would say, okay, so what's our plan here, right? Like, how are we going to get people connected to the church? And they would throw out something like, believe, belong, become. And they've spent all this time preparing all these things. And I think for them, the coolest part of this process was I would literally, I had a good relationship with them. So it was a little bit, was able to be a little bit more, casual, but I said, I don't know what that means. I have no idea what that means. So for them to kind of get outside of that box and they had thought through it and they totally had an awesome launch plan and really knew their church. But
I've made a billboard for a church plant that said belong, believe, become, because it's based off a book. And so if this was 3 years ago, I was like, wow. But I just want to say, like, that's a very common phrase because most church planners have read that book. Totally. But like you were saying, as someone who hasn't read the book, you had no clue what that meant.
Totally. Yeah. And there was other instances, like they were trying to put like their agreement plan into like into an acronym or, just different things like that. And so I would just literally look at them and I'm like, guys, I don't know what that means. Like, and do you go up to somebody on the street and say, hey, belong, believe, belong, become, or whatever that, and I would say, no, you kind of explain how it is. So that's what we're going to be doing, here. And for them to get outside of their box and really have that click, I think was really helpful for them because it provided a framework for clarity that they understood, but they weren't quite able to get there completely because of the way that they kind of process and think through information. And so for that type of person who's not super creative, I think that was really, really beneficial for them.
And where you guys landed on the website homepage, become who God created you to be. That's so much more. I'm assuming is that the same church?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just assuming things at this point.
No, you're right. You're right.
But that's so much more compelling than belong, believe, become, or whatever it would have been. Right. Become who God created you to be it opens a story loop and makes me want, okay, I want to do that. So you took them from something that would have been okay and is safe in the church world to a place where it's so much better. I'm just reading through the site right now. Like if you're looking for a place where you can become who God created you to be, grow in your faith, experience the presence of God, experience the power of prayer, find balance in a busy world, become emotionally healthy, learn to apply scripture to your life, like all these things, then this church is right for you.
Yeah. It's like, one of the things I want to point out too is this was a church, and I've been to the church just to visit and whatever. They definitely attract folks who are Christians. Like they're attracting people who are maybe de-churched, or they are, they maybe were at another church and they're just not, I want to be careful. I want to be sensitive to this topic, but maybe it wasn't a good spot for them to be, or, they were burned by a church in the past, whatever the case. Like most of the people, if not all at their church, have been to church before and are aware of church language, Christianese, all that kind of stuff. So we technically could have been fine with using some more, church inside language. But what we were able to do is like, in like, I'm just trying to pull up one example here. So learn to apply scripture to your life. Instead of saying like something that was more churchy, we just said, here's how you apply, biblical scripture to your life. Right. So even understanding that our audience could pick up on some of the church language, we still avoided it, in order to help just speak clearly to them and also welcome in the audience of people who maybe haven't been to church in a while or aren't aware of what those words mean.
And I think that's one of the things that StoryBrand really helps you do, because it helps you narrow in on your target, but also the curse of knowledge is real. And we did 2 episodes on this last season. I almost said semester. You can tell I used to be a student ministry guy. But the curse of knowledge is real, and it's really hard to get around it unless someone is pushing you to get around it.
Right. Yeah, you're totally right. And if you haven't listened to this, I would totally recommend going back and listening to those 2 episodes. I think those are, in terms of like foundational StoryBrand and just understanding how to get out of your own way, I think those 2 episodes are game changers. I had so many people come up and tell me, I'm sure you did too, Jonathan, tell me that those 2 episodes specifically were really helpful for them understanding, kind of why they need to speak to people a little bit more clearly and how they're operating under the curse of knowledge, and then ultimately how to use that to their advantage. I'm not sure what order this episode is popping up this season, but my friend Aaron Bolton from Gateway Church in Scottsdale, is a worship leader there, and he actually listened to those 2 episodes. Those were his first episodes that he listened to, and it just was a game changer for him. And being on stage and being able to just say, hey, here's why we do this song, here's what this means, and then jump into it. And he'll talk a little bit more about that in his episode if you haven't listened to it already. But the curse of knowledge is something that I think if churches can understand and really fully get behind and say, here's why we're operating in this, it's totally changes the dynamic and how they communicate and how they address people.
We'll get back to the conversation with Kyler in just a minute, but if you're listening to this and you're realizing that your church may need some help, whether that's some hourly coaching or consultation on how to develop a brand script from the ground up, or any level of consultation and coaching that you may need, I'd love to start a conversation with you about how I can help you with that. Head over to hirejonathan.com, fill the form out there, and then we'll begin that conversation on how you can transform your communication so that you can reach more people and have a bigger impact in your community. Again, if you want any coaching, consulting, or any level of story brand implementation help, head over to hirejonathan.com, fill the form out, and then we'll have a conversation about how you can transform your communications and reach more people. But for now, let's get back to the conversation with Kyler. One of the things that I think is a misconception is that if you want to do story brand, you have to completely overhaul your website and everything you do. And that's not necessarily true, because I've been able to implement it a little bit with some churches that I kind of have long-term relationships with. We haven't gone through the entire brand scripting process yet, but the principles of making our attender the hero is something that we've been able to implement. Just the idea of making the attender the hero in just our copy. So we took what could have been a more traditional church layout that you might see on a normal church website, and we just changed the copy. And instead of saying our events do this, this, and this, we said events are a great place for you to meet other people, get connected to those you worship with each weekend, and develop deeper relationships. So that's the basic idea of what StoryBrand is. We're wanting to guide our people to where they're wanting to go. Another one we did is this church, they do what's called the Weekender, which is their next steps membership type thing. And so instead of saying the Weekender is our version of a membership class and it's so that you can blah, 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 we changed it to the Weekender is your on-ramp to hear about our values and vision, possible serving opportunities, and how to get connected into a community group at our church.
Totally.
So it was all about positioning so that the attender knew we were trying to help them. And at the end of the day, I think that StoryBrand is more, I mean, I know it's said to be a marketing platform, but I think it's more of a positioning tool, because it allows us to position ourselves in a certain way and position ourselves in the community, in the marketplace, or whatever it might be, in a way that most other people aren't doing.
Right. And that's how, I mean, the beauty of StoryBrand is that's how people understand things, right? We understand story. That's why it was created. So the more we're able to press into those elements of story where we make our visitor the hero, and like you said, it's a really subtle change, and it doesn't have to be something that is like, oh man, we got to overhaul our website and we got to write an email campaign and we got to redo our guest services and all this kind of stuff. Like over the next year, or over the rest of this summer, if you're listening to this when it first releases, like just spend a little bit of time week by week cleaning up some things that are simple wins, like announcements. Super simple win, like just restructuring your announcements into a one-liner format, which we talked about last season. Cleaning up some of the language on your website. I've talked about this in a couple of the website episodes, but a simple test to know if you're making your visitor the hero, and this is the case for verbal communication, written communication, website, whatever. If you say more you and your than we and our, you're making them the hero, which is good. Most churches, I go on their website and it says, read about our values, meet our team, see our upcoming events, see our sermon series, see, here is our whatever, blah, 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 blah. The churches that win and the churches that really utilize StoryBrand effectively and ultimately reach their community better are the ones that have more you and yours on their website. like without a doubt, without fail, I see that every single time. That test has not let me down yet. So scan through your site. You can even do like, I think it's Command F on your site, type in you and your, and it should have more than we and our. And that's a simple way to just test if you're making your visitor the hero.
I've got another example of that one. This one was pretty impressive just because of the situation. And so let me set it up. This church was a multi-campus church. The lead pastor had been there for, I think, 30 plus years. He'd been around for a long time. His son was the campus pastor. They actually, their second campus was 3 blocks away from the main campus. You had to drive past the second campus to get to the main campus for most people. They did live teaching at both campuses. So the dad, lead pastor, spoke at their campus, and then the son spoke at the newer campus. So essentially it was one church, but they operated totally different worship styles. If you've been around the church world for a while, think Charles and Andy Stanley, way back when, where Andy had his own campus because they didn't want Andy to leave. But instead of Andy going and starting his own church like he did, in this case, the lead pastor ended up retiring. The son moved into the lead pastor role, and they combined both campuses back into one. And so they have 3 services on Sunday morning. The first 2 are the more traditional services. The third service is the more modern that was at their campus. So you're talking, I think it's like 3,000 to 4,000 people on a weekend. So a church of 7,000 to 8,000 of regular attenders. There was a lot of moving parts. This was back in February. And just by our language, we made sure to focus everything that, like, things won't be changing for you. We're doing this because we want to be one church together again. And we framed it in a way that was attender specific. And then I think it was back in May, we launched a new site for them. And in it, we included an agreement plan, which is basically their values. And then their what to expect language, we made the guest the hero. And what's really cool about this is I looked at the stats this week before we recorded this episode. Year over year, their website views are up 20% from last year. And normally when you have a leadership transition like this, like, attendance will drop by like a third, or your reach will drop pretty significantly. But their website views are up 20%, and their new user views are up 24%. So they're reaching even more people now just by implementing these small, tiny little changes. A couple more stats for the nerds out there. Session duration is up 14%, and the bounce rate is down by 13%. So we're making strides through everything. And they haven't story branded their entire communications. We just did some basic copy changes and implemented it that way, and it connected with people better than it was before.
One of the things I told, I kind of took this seriously as my role when I worked in communications at a church. I said my role, and then the tech team kind of was along this line too. Anyone who made Sunday services happen was my role is to remove barriers for people. And I would hope that is your role as well, right? Like, I want to remove anything that's in the way of people experiencing the presence of God in a new, exciting way, or just allowing them to be with Him on Sunday mornings and throughout the week, right? Like, that's my goal. So when we think about that question and we apply it to what we're doing in churches, I guess the foundational question that I think you and I do this naturally, but if you're listening to this, like, and you may do this naturally as well, but think through, like, what are some barriers that we have that we can be removing for people? Like you just mentioned, one of the barriers that church had is they had multiple worship styles, and they were kind of combining into one. I pulled up that site you did. It says, we know showing up to the big church on Alcoa Highway can be intimidating. Like, that's a barrier for people because it's like, man, that's a huge church. Like, I think I'm going to get lost in that sea. So if you're able to say, like, here are some barriers, here are some things that you might be worried about, and then we can help you overcome that, or even just addressing it and calling it what it is. I think that's a win all the time. Like, my home church, still does printed bulletins, and it's just a single one sheet. It's helpful for them. But what we did is we sat down and I said, okay, so what are the three main questions people might have on a Sunday morning? One, what is the music like? Two, am I expected to give? And then three, what's the message like, right? If they had never been to church, or maybe they've been to a Catholic church, or they've been to a different style of church, those are probably three common questions that they have. So literally the full left side of the bulletin is what to expect today. It's in a huge title. It says, welcome to Crossroads. We're so glad you chose to spend your Sunday with us. Below are some things you can expect from our service. To the right are some upcoming events. We're glad you're here. And then just down below that, we just said, one, what's the music like? And then we, wrote it out. This morning, here's what you'll hear. Giving, am I expected to give? And then talked about it. So all that stuff just is they're just real simple ways to help remove those barriers, overcome objections and fears for people that you can implement like right away. It doesn't have to be this huge, like drawn out thing.
And I think that was our goal for this season. As we wrap up this episode, and this is the last episode of this season, so that was our goal that we would hope you would get through this, is that StoryBrand can really be implemented anywhere in your church to remove the barriers that people have. Whether it's the episode with Seth where we talked about giving, and their messaging help remove the barriers between people and giving to a church. Maybe it was the episode with Jeff about teaching, when we talk about putting ourselves together and our sermon together and focusing on how we're helping our attenders solve problems. That takes away the barriers, because you take away the barrier of, what does this have to do with me? Or any of the other episodes we've talked about. Everything is about making people realize that you're there to help them, that you want what's best for them, and that you're going to do whatever it takes to remove those barriers so that they can meet with Jesus.
100%. That is StoryBrand for churches and Solving Problems podcast at its core.
All right, Kyler, I have been giving out my hirejonathan.com all season long, but if someone wants to partner with you, what's the best way that they can get started on that?
You can go to Kyler Creative, and Kyler is Kyler, creative.com. I have a couple free resources for churches, StoryBrand wireframe for your website if you want a DIY approach, but otherwise you can click start a project in the top right corner of my site. And I'd love to partner with your church and help implement anything that we talked about this season or in the past 2 seasons.
For me, it's hirejonathan.com. You can fill out the form there, and that'll just start the conversation on how we can transform your marketing and your communications so that you can reach more people and have a bigger impact in your city. But that's it for season 3. Thanks so much for hanging out with us. We'll have a new season this fall once you guys get back in the rhythm. Again, we dropped all 8 episodes of season 3 on the same day, so that if this is your first episode or this is the 8th episode you listen to, thanks for listening. All the other episodes, there are 23 other episodes for Solving Problems that you can listen to and hear all about how you can apply StoryBrand to your church. But thanks so much for hanging out with us. We will see you again in the fall. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, review, share the podcast with a friend. If you want to connect with us on social, I am at Jonathan_Carone on Instagram and Twitter, or Jonathan Carone on Facebook. Kyler is at Kyler_Nixon on Instagram and Twitter, or Kyler Nixon on Facebook. Thanks again for hanging out with us, and we hope you have a great summer and a successful fall.